The year was 1874, and somewhere along the cracked red earth of West Texas, a wagon was moving. Slow, deliberate, like a funeral procession heading nowhere good. Inside that wagon sat a woman in a dress that had once been white. Her hands were folded in her lap, her jaw was set tight, and her eyes were watching the horizon the way a hawk watches a field. Still, patient, dangerous. Her name was Clara Weston, and the men who arranged her marriage had one goal in mind: destroy her. See, they didn't send her to be a wife. They sent her to be a weapon. A quiet, docile weapon aimed directly at the one man standing between them and the most valuable land in all of Texas. His name was Cole Reardon, cattle rancher, a war survivor, a man who had built something real out of nothing but blood and stubbornness. They thought sending him a broken woman would break him. They were wrong, but nobody knew that yet. Not Clara, not Cole, not the men who set this whole terrible thing in motion. Before we begin, tell me, where are you watching from? Sending love your way. Now settle in. Because this story is about a woman they underestimated, a man who had almost given up, and a piece of land that would make legends out of both of them, or bury them trying. The Reardon Ranch sat like a crown nobody wanted to acknowledge. 3,000 acres of West Texas running land, cut through with a river that never dried up even in the worst summers. The grass grew thick and green along the banks. The soil ran dark and deep, and beneath parts of that land, though Cole Reardon didn't fully know it yet, there was something that men would kill for without blinking. But before any of that, before the greed and the scheming and the blood, you had to understand what it had cost Cole to keep it. He'd come back from the war in 1865 with one working eye, 3 cracked ribs that never healed right, and a piece of paper his father had pressed into his hands before dying on a Tuesday morning in April. That paper was the deed to the Reardon land. His father had written 2 words across the back in shaking pencil. Hold it. So Cole held it. He worked 16-hour days through droughts that cracked the earth like old pottery. He buried 2 ranch hands who had been more like brothers. He fought off 3 separate attempts by men to purchase the land at prices so low they were really just insults dressed up in formal language. He said no every time, and the land rewarded him for it. By 1874, the Reardon Ranch ran over 400 head of cattle. Cole had hired 7 permanent hands and built a proper bunkhouse, a real barn, and a ranch house that sat solid and square against the Texas wind. He wasn't rich by city standards, but out here, in the red dust and the wide open silence, he was something rarer than rich. He was secure, and that made him dangerous to certain men. The man who wanted the Reardon land most was named Douglas Harlan. He was not the kind of man who wore his villainy on his sleeve. He wore it underneath a tailored suit and a courteous smile, and he sat behind a large oak desk in Marston City, the nearest town of any consequence, running a land acquisition company that had swallowed up 6 smaller ranches in the past 2 years alone. Douglas Harlan had the patience of a snake in winter. He would wait. He would maneuver. He would find the weakness and press on it until something cracked. And he believed, deeply, that every man had a weakness. Cole Reardon's, he decided, was loneliness. Word had gotten around that Cole had been corresponding with a matchmaking service back east. He was 34 years old, built like a barn door, quiet as stone, and, whether he admitted it or not, tired of coming home to a ranch house with no life in it. His foreman, an older Mexican man named Santiago, had encouraged him plain and simple one evening over a fire. A man needs somebody, boss. Even the rocks got moss on them. Cole had written the letter 3 months later. What Cole didn't know, couldn't have known, was that Douglas Harlan had connections inside that matchmaking service. Paid contact. A man who could steer certain arrangements. And Douglas had found exactly the woman he needed. Clara Weston. She was 26 years old, the daughter of a failed Boston merchant who had died owing debts to powerful people. Those powerful people had essentially traded her to the matchmaking service to settle accounts, a thing that happened more than respectable society ever admitted. She arrived at the service's office in Philadelphia with one small trunk, no money, and no illusions about her situation. She had been educated. That much was clear. She spoke French, read Latin, understood basic law, could calculate figures faster than most men with a ledger, and had spent the last 4 years managing what remained of her father's business while it slowly collapsed around her. Douglas Harlan saw her file and smiled. He saw a woman with no family, no money, no allies, and no name worth anything. A woman who would arrive in Texas already defeated, already broken by circumstance. Someone who would weigh Cole down, distract him, introduce chaos into the careful order of ranch life. He arranged for the correspondence to go forward. He arranged for Cole to receive only flattering but carefully vague letters. Letters that made Clara sound pleasant but unremarkable. And he arranged for Clara to receive letters that painted Cole as a simple, rough man who needed a housekeeper more than a wife. What neither Cole nor Clara knew was that they had never truly written to each other. The letters had been crafted, edited, and curated by Harlan's man. The two strangers who were about to meet had been invented for each other. Fiction meeting fiction on a wagon road in West Texas. The real Clara Weston, the real Cole Reardon, those two people were entirely unknown to each other. And that unknowing was exactly what Harlan was counting on. The wagon carrying Clara rolled through Marston City on a Thursday afternoon in late September. Dust hung in the air like smoke that forgot to rise. The main street was quiet in the way small western towns go quiet when something interesting is happening and nobody wants to admit they're watching. Clara looked out through the wagon's canvas opening and took in the town with those hawk eyes of hers. One general store. One saloon with a broken sign. A sheriff's office that looked like it hadn't been painted since before the war. A church with a cracked bell. Small. Rough. Real. She set her jaw a little tighter. She did not look afraid. But her hands, folded so neat and still in her lap, they were pressing hard against each other. Hard enough to whiten the knuckles. She was afraid. She just refused to look it. And some miles ahead of her, out on the Reardon land, Cole stood at the fence line watching the western road. He had been told his bride would arrive before sundown. Santiago appeared at his shoulder. "You nervous, boss?" Cole was quiet for a long moment. "No," he said. Santiago looked at his hands, gripping the fence post hard enough to splinter it slightly. "Sure," Santiago said quietly, and walked away. The sun was already beginning its slow descent. Red light spilling over the Texas grass. And somewhere between that ranch and that wagon, something was about to begin that no one, not Harlan, not Clara, not Cole, had truly planned for. She arrived at the Reardon Ranch as the last orange light was bleeding out of the sky. The wagon driver, a thin man who had said exactly 7 words the entire 2-day journey, pulled the horses to a stop near the gate and pointed toward the ranch house without looking at her. Clara gathered her small trunk, stepped down from the wagon by herself without waiting for help, and stood in the dirt road looking at the place that was supposed to be her new home. It was bigger than she'd imagined. That surprised her. The ranch house was plain but solid. Wide porch running the length of the front. 2 lanterns burning at the posts. A barn to the left, large and well-kept. Fencing stretching away into the growing dark in both directions. Somewhere in the distance, cattle moved slowly like shadows with weight. It was not the rough, desperate homestead Harlan's man had described in those manufactured letters. It was a working ranch. A real one. She stood there recalibrating for exactly 3 seconds. Then she picked up her trunk and walked toward the porch. Cole came around the side of the house at that moment. He'd been checking the water trough, the kind of last-minute, unnecessary task a nervous man finds for himself. He stopped when he saw her. She was not what he expected either. The letters had described a quiet, gentle woman of modest education and simple needs. The woman standing in his yard was quiet, yes. But there was nothing modest or simple about the way she held herself. Back straight, chin level, one hand gripping the trunk handle, the other hanging loose and ready at her side like she expected trouble and had made peace with that expectation. She looked at him. He looked at her. Neither spoke for a moment. Then Clara said, "Mr. Reardon." "Miss Weston," he said. He took his hat off. She waited. He seemed to be searching for the next sentence and not finding it quickly. "You had a long trip," he finally managed. 2 days. she said. The second was harder. I'll have Santiago show you I can find my way, she said. And then, as if she heard how sharp that had come out, she added more quietly, Thank you. I'm just tired. He nodded. Of course. He called for Santiago anyway, because it was the right thing to do, and the old foreman appeared from the barn with the easy, unhurried movement of a man who had seen everything twice and was never surprised. He smiled at Clara with genuine warmth, the first smile she'd received since leaving Philadelphia, and led her inside. Cole stood in the yard for a moment after they'd gone in. He looked at the sky, now going deep purple and pricked with early stars. He had expected to feel something definite at this moment, relief, maybe, or hope, or even just the simple satisfaction of a plan moving forward. Instead, he felt uncertain in a way he hadn't felt since the war, like something was slightly wrong, but he couldn't name it yet. Inside, Santiago showed Clara to the room off the back of the house. It was small but clean, a real bed, a chest of drawers, a window facing east, which meant morning light, which she noted with quiet approval. Someone had placed a small jar of dried wildflowers on the sill. She suspected that had been Santiago, not Cole. When he left her alone, Clara sat on the edge of the bed and allowed herself exactly 2 minutes of feeling overwhelmed. 2 minutes exactly. She had been doing this since her father's business collapsed, allowing herself a precise and limited amount of despair before shutting the door on it and getting back to work. Then she stood up, opened her trunk, and took out a slim leather journal. She had kept records her entire adult life. Financial records, notes, observations, calculations. It was not a diary, it was closer to a ledger of life. She opened to a fresh page and wrote the date. Then she wrote, *Reardon Ranch. Larger than described. Well-maintained. Cattle operation. River access. Estimate 7 to 8 hands. Foreman is competent. Cole Reardon is, *. She paused. Looked at the blank space after that dash. She wrote, unknown. Over the next 3 days, Clara did something that nobody expected. She said almost nothing, but she watched everything. She walked the property at dawn before anyone else was fully awake, moving along the fence lines with her journal in her hand. She stood at the entrance to the barn and watched how the hands worked. She walked along the river bank for nearly a mile one morning, studying the water levels, the soil, the way the grass grew. She sat in the kitchen during meals and listened to the conversation, the ordinary, functional conversation of men who lived by land and weather and the price of beef. Cole watched her watching. He wasn't sure what to make of it. On the 4th morning, she came to find him at the fence line where he was doing a routine inspection. You have a drainage problem in the south quarter, she said without preamble. He looked at her. The grass is dying in a ring about 40 yards across, she continued. The soil is waterlogged underneath, but the surface looks dry. If it rains hard this fall, you'll lose that section of grazing and the cattle will push the mud. You should dig a cut channel. Redirect the runoff west toward the lower field. She said all of this the way you say things that are simply facts. No performance. No request for approval. Cole looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, How do you know about drainage? My father ran a farm before he ran a business, she said. I grew up watching things fail and trying to understand why. She turned and walked back toward the house. Cole turned and looked at the south quarter. He had noticed the dying grass. He had been meaning to look into it. He picked up his hat, scratched the back of his head slowly, and was quiet for a long time. Then he went to find his shovel. Marston City was a town that ran on 2 things: cattle, money, and whiskey. And like most towns of its kind, it had a man at the center of it who made sure most of both ended up moving in his direction. Douglas Harlan's office sat above the Marston Land and Finance Company on the 2nd floor of the only 2-story building in town. The windows faced the main street, which Harlan had chosen deliberately. He liked to see who was moving and where. He liked to know things before others knew he knew them. On the morning of the 4th day after Clara's arrival, Harlan received a report from his man at the ranch, one of the hands he had placed there 6 months ago. A young man named Garrett who was quick with horses and quicker with deception. The report was not what Harlan had hoped for. He read it twice, standing at his window, and his expression did not change. It rarely did. That was one of the things people found most unsettling about Douglas Harlan. He didn't react to news the way normal people did, with some flash of emotion that showed you where his feelings lived. He simply processed information and adjusted. The report said Clara Weston had not behaved as expected. She had not been tearful, confused, or demanding of the Cowboy's time and attention. She had not been a disruption. She had, apparently, already identified a drainage issue on the south quarter and advised Cole on how to address it. Harlan set the letter down on his desk. He walked to the window. He looked at the dusty street below where two ranch hands were arguing good-naturedly over the price of a saddle outside the general store. The plan had been simple in concept. Cole Reardon was a man who had run his ranch with rigid efficiency and no personal distractions for nearly a decade. Introduce a difficult, needy, or incompetent wife, and the ranch's careful operation would begin to fray. The cattle schedule would slip. The hands would become unsettled. Costs would creep up. And Cole, proud, stubborn Cole, would find himself in a position where selling began to look, not like defeat, but like relief. It was a slow plan. Harlan was good at slow plans. But the woman was not cooperating. He called for Garrett to come to his office that afternoon. When the young man arrived, dusty from the ride, hat in his hands, Harlan sat him down and asked him to describe Clara Weston in his own words. Garrett thought for a moment. "She's quiet," he said. "But not the quiet of someone who's scared. It's the quiet of someone who's thinking. What does she do during the day? Walks the land, mostly. Always got that journal with her. She's been out to the river twice that I've seen. She asked Santiago how many head they run through summer versus winter." Harlan was quiet. "She asked about feed costs," Garrett added. "And something about mineral deposits in the eastern ridge." That last part made Harlan's eyes sharpen just slightly. Just enough for Garrett to notice and feel a slight chill without knowing why. "Go back," Harlan said quietly. "Watch her. Write down everything she asks about. Everything she looks at." Garrett nodded and left. Harlan turned back to his window. The mineral deposits in the eastern ridge of the Reardon property were the reason Douglas Harlan had been pursuing this land for 3 years. Not the cattle range, though that was valuable enough. Not the river access, though that was a powerful advantage in dry country. No, it was what lay beneath the eastern ridge, which Harlan had commissioned a private geological survey to assess 2 years ago. Iron ore, significant deposits. Enough to supply a railroad operation for 20 years or more, at a time when railroad expansion across West Texas was not a dream but an inevitability. Whoever owned that land when the railroad came through would not merely be wealthy. They would be untouchable. Cole Reardon had no idea what he was sitting on. Harlan had been certain of that. The man was a cattle rancher. He thought in terms of grass and water and beef prices. He didn't know geology. He didn't track railroad surveys. He had no reason to. But now there was a woman on that ranch who was asking about mineral deposits. And she had been in Texas less than a week. Harlan moved to his desk. He sat down. He opened the bottom drawer and removed a thin folder, his dossier on Clara Weston. He had compiled it before arranging the match, mostly to confirm she had no resources or connections that could threaten his plan. He read through it again now, slower this time, looking for what he had dismissed before. Father James Weston, failed merchant. But before that, he had been an investor in a small mining operation in Pennsylvania. 12 years ago, lost money in it. The operation had failed due to mismanagement, not lack of or. Harlan read that part twice. She had grown up around a man who chased minerals in the ground, who talked about surveys and deposits and extraction costs at the dinner table the way other men talked about crops and weather. The woman on Cole Reardon's ranch was not confused or naive. She might, Harlan realized with something close to discomfort, be the most dangerous person on that property. He closed the folder slowly. He needed a different approach. Something more direct. Something with an edge of threat behind it. He picked up his pen and began drafting a letter to the county land office. A letter about a supposed boundary dispute involving the Reardon property's eastern edge. False, of course. But disputes took time to resolve. Time during which inspectors came. Questions were asked. Uncertainty spread. It was a crude move for a man of his patience. But patience, Harlan was beginning to understand, might be a luxury he no longer fully had. Clara Weston was already asking about the Eastern Ridge, and he needed her stopped before she understood what she had found. Started small, the way disasters always do. A single line of orange at the edge of the dry grass in the south field, just past midnight on a Wednesday in October. By the time the night watch hand spotted it and raised the alarm, it had grown into a wall of fire moving northeast on the wind. Cole was out of bed and running before the shouting fully registered in his brain. The south field, where the drainage problem had been identified, where the ground was still soft from the recent channel work, where new grass was only just beginning to show after the repair. It was also the field closest to the main cattle corral. Cole hit the porch at a full run and stopped for 1 second, taking in the situation with the soldier's eye he'd never fully shed. The fire was moving in the right direction. Northeast would push it away from the barn. But if the wind shifted even slightly, it would turn toward the corral, and 400 head of panicked cattle in a burning field at night was the kind of thing that could end a ranch in 1 hour. "Get the cattle moving north," he shouted. "All of you now. Santiago, wet the corral fencing." He was already moving toward the fire line with a saddle blanket, the old low-tech method that sometimes worked and sometimes just got you burned. 3 hands fell in beside him. They beat at the edges, trying to break the spread, coughing through smoke that tasted of dry grass and something sharper. Something wrong. That smell. Cole stopped beating for 1 second and breathed it in. His eye narrowed. Kerosene. Not lightning. Not a dropped lantern. This fire had been set. He kept working. There was no choice in that moment. But the knowledge settled cold and hard inside his chest even as the heat pushed against his face. Someone had set fire to his land. It took 90 minutes to get it contained. They lost about 40 acres of grazing field. The cattle were shaken and pushed north and accounted for, everyone. The barn held. The ranch house was never in danger. When it was over, the men stood at the black and smoking edge of the dead field, breathing hard, faces dark with soot. The sky above them was beginning to show the first gray suggestion of dawn. Cole stood apart from the others, looking at the charred ground. Clara appeared at his shoulder. She had been there through most of it. Not in the way, not demanding anything, but present. She had managed the water situation at the house, organized the bucket line from the pump, kept the 2 youngest hands calm when they started to panic. Cole hadn't noticed until this moment how much she had simply handled without being asked. "It was kerosene," she said quietly. Not a question. "Yes," he said. "You know who did it." It was not a question either. She was reading him the way she read everything on this ranch, directly and without flinching from what she found. He didn't answer for a moment. Then he said, "I have a suspicion. Douglas Harlan," she said. Cole turned to look at her. Her jaw was set in that way he was beginning to recognize, the expression that meant she had already worked through a problem and arrived at a conclusion most people hadn't found yet. "What do you know about Harlan?" he asked. "I know he arranged this marriage," she said. "Or rather, arranged it as he needed it to be, which is different from what it actually is." Cole was very still. "The letters I received describing you," she said, "were not written by you. The language was wrong. The details were inconsistent. The man described in those letters was barely literate. You are clearly not." She said it without judgment, simply factual. "The letters I sent were also likely intercepted and replaced," she continued. "I suspected it by the end of our correspondence, but I had no choice about coming. I had nowhere else to go. What I didn't understand until I arrived here was what he actually wanted." "The land," Cole said. "The Eastern Ridge specifically," she said. "Theirs or under there, Cole." It was the first time she had used his first name. He noticed it but said nothing. "Iron ore," she said. "Possibly significant deposits. My father spent years on a failed mining venture in Pennsylvania. I grew up learning to read the land the way a miner does. The rock formations on your eastern edge, The way the creek bends around that hill, the color of the soil. I noticed it my second day here. I didn't say anything because I was still working out what it meant. She paused. Harlan knows, she said. He must have had a survey done. That's why he wants this land badly enough to arrange a false marriage and now burn a field. Cole looked back at the scorched earth. 40 acres of his grazing land, black and ruined in the early morning light. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Why are you telling me this?" She looked at him steadily. "Because it's my land now too," she said. "Whatever arrangement Harlan imagined this marriage to be, it is still a real marriage by law. And I did not travel 2,000 miles to be used as someone's weapon." There was something in her voice at that last sentence. Not just anger. Something older than anger. Something that had been there a long time, built up from a life spent being moved around by other people's decisions. Cole looked at her, really looked at her, for what might have been the first time, and he made a decision that would change everything. "Santiago," he said, raising his voice to carry across the yard. "Saddle 2 horses." Santiago appeared from the direction of the barn, took in Cole's face and Clara's, and asked no questions. He just nodded and went to saddle the horses. "Where are we going?" Clara asked. "To see a man about what's buried in my land," Cole said. "And after that, we're going to see the county surveyor." He looked at the charred field once more. "We're going to do this right," he said, "before Harlan gets another move." The ride into Marston City was tense and quiet in the way that precedes something that cannot be undone. Cole rode with the stillness of a man who had decided something, and Clara rode beside him with that same steady focus she brought to everything, watching, cataloging, preparing. Santiago had offered to come, but Cole had told him to stay. Someone reliable needed to be at the ranch. The town was beginning to stir when they arrived. Smoke from breakfast fires. A livery boy sweeping dust from a porch. The saloon closed and silent at this early hour, its sign creaking in the morning wind. Cole led them first to the office of Edmund Pryor, the county surveyor. Pryor was a small man with ink-stained fingers and the somewhat startled air of someone perpetually surprised to find themselves important. Cole had dealt with him twice before on routine boundary paperwork and found him nervously honest, the kind of man who feared breaking rules more than he feared anything else. When they entered his office, Pryor rose from his desk with a look that was immediately and visibly uncomfortable. Cole saw that expression and read it fast. "He's already been here," Cole said. "Not a question." Pryor swallowed. "Mr. Reardon, there's been a boundary dispute filed by the Marston Land and Finance Company regarding your eastern." "I know what it regards," Cole said, keeping his voice level. "When was it filed?" 3 days ago. 3 days ago. The day before the fire. Harlan had filed the paperwork first and then sent someone with a kerosene can, 2 pressure points working simultaneously. Clara stepped forward. "Mr. Pryor," she said, in a voice that was professionally calm. "A fraudulent boundary dispute filing is a criminal matter under Texas property law. If you process that filing without first conducting an independent survey, you become party to that fraud." Pryor blinked at her. "My wife," Cole said, in a tone that was simple and declarative. Pryor looked between them. The filing is standard procedure, it doesn't necessarily." "We'd like to commission an independent survey," Clara said. "Today, if possible. Of the Eastern Ridge specifically. And we'd like that survey registered with the State Land Office in Austin, not just the county office." That last part, filing with Austin directly, was the key move. Put the record above Harlan's reach. County officials could be pressured, paid, or maneuvered. State records were harder. Much harder. Pryor looked at his desk, then at Clara, then at Cole. Cole was watching him with that single steady eye that Pryor found deeply uncomfortable to meet directly. "I can have a surveyor out to the Reardon property by end of week," Pryor said quietly. "Tomorrow," Clara said. "Tomorrow," Pryor agreed. When they left Pryor's office, they had secured the survey and filed a countermotion against the fraudulent boundary claim. Clara had written the countermotion herself, standing at Pryor's desk, in clean and legally precise language that made Pryor blink twice and look at Cole with an expression that was somewhere between impressed and frightened. Cole had said nothing during that part, just watched. Now, on the boardwalk outside, Clara stood looking at the upper windows of the Marston Land and Finance building across the street. Harlan's windows, the ones that faced the street so he could watch everything. The curtain moved slightly. Someone was watching. "He's up there," Cole said. "I know," Clara said. Good. She wanted him to see them, wanted him to know the move had been made. They started across the street. Cole pushed open the door to the building and they went up the stairs. At the top, a young secretary started to rise with some prepared obstruction. But Cole walked past him with a momentum that made the young man sit back down again, and Clara came through behind him like a shadow with purpose. Harlan's door was heavy oak. Cole opened it without knocking. Harlan was behind his desk, and to his credit, he did not flinch. He looked up from his papers with that neutral expression, that careful, processed calm. His eyes moved from Cole to Clara and back. "Cole Reardon," he said pleasantly. "And this must be your new bride. Congratulations." "The boundary filing is going to be dismissed," Cole said. "We filed a counterclaim with the county and registered an independent survey request with the state land office. The survey happens tomorrow." Something moved behind Harlan's eyes. Small, quick, buried again instantly. "I'm sure this is all a misunderstanding," Harlan said smoothly. "The fire last night," Clara said quietly, "was set with kerosene on the southern field of the Reardon property. A deliberate act of arson. If we can tie that to your organization, Mr. Harlan, and we have a witness who smelled the kerosene and will say so under oath, that's a serious crime, not a property dispute." Harlan looked at her. For the first time, she saw something shift slightly in that careful face. Not fear, not quite, but the calculation of a man suddenly dealing with a different problem than the one he had prepared for. "Mrs. Reardon," he said slowly, "you seem like a very capable woman." "Yes," she said simply. "I am." "This doesn't have to be conflict," he said. "There are ways to discuss the land. Ways that could benefit everyone involved." "When my husband is ready to discuss his land," Clara said, "he'll arrange a meeting on his terms, with a lawyer present, and a state official." She turned and walked out. Cole looked at Harlan for one long moment. Harlan looked back. "You sent me a woman to ruin my ranch," Cole said quietly. "You should have thought more carefully about what kind of woman you were sending." He put his hat back on and walked out. In the street below, Clara was already mounted, waiting, watching the horizon with that hawk stillness. Cole mounted and rode up beside her. "Well," he said. "Now we wait," she said. "And we build." The survey happened the following morning. 3 men from the state land office arrived with instruments and notebooks and the cautious, professional demeanor of men who understood they had been sent to settle something significant. They spent 2 full days on the eastern ridge of the Reardon property, measuring and sampling and recording. Cole gave them access to everything and said almost nothing. Clara walked with them for parts of both days, answering questions in the precise, knowledgeable way she had developed over a lifetime of watching her father's failed venture and swearing silently to understand what he had missed. On the evening of the second day, the lead surveyor, a man named Cartwright, sat with Cole and Clara at the kitchen table and laid out his preliminary findings. The eastern ridge contained iron ore deposits that extended for nearly half a mile underground. The density of the deposits was, in Cartwright's measured words, exceptional. The accessible depth was workable with current technology. And the proximity to what would soon become the Southern Pacific Rail Corridor. Cartwright paused here and looked at them carefully, made the site genuinely remarkable in terms of commercial value. Cole sat very still through all of this. Clara asked 3 precise questions about extraction costs, environmental considerations, and the process for filing a mineral rights claim separate from land title. When Cartwright and his men left for the night, Cole and Clara sat at that table in silence for a long moment. "Did you know it was this significant?" Cole asked. "I suspected it was significant," she said. "I didn't know it was this significant." He nodded slowly. Outside, Through the kitchen window, the Texas night was enormous and starred and quiet. The rebuilt south field, the new drainage channel working exactly as Clara had said it would, lay dark and peaceful. The cattle were settled. The barn was locked. The ranch breathed its slow nighttime breath. "Why did you stay?" Cole asked then. Not accusingly. Genuinely. She considered the question seriously. "When I arrived here," she said finally, "I expected to find exactly what the letters described. A rough man, a struggling ranch, a situation I was being used to make worse. That was the plan. I understood the plan." She looked at her hands on the table. "But what I found instead was something real," she said. "You built this. Not with money or connections or luck. You built it with the kind of work that asks nothing back and just does the next right thing. I hadn't seen that before. Not this purely." She paused. "I had been moved around by other people's decisions my whole life," she said. "My father's decisions. The merchants who held his debts. Harlan's scheming. I was tired of being someone else's piece on someone else's board." She looked up. "This land became my decision," she said quietly. "The first real one I'd ever made." Cole was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "It's your land too. I want that to be in writing. I want your name on the deed beside mine. And the mineral rights in both names." She looked at him. "I mean it," he said. "Whatever Harlan thought he was doing, he was wrong about a lot of things. But he was wrong about this most of all. This ranch doesn't need one of us. It needs both of us." It was the longest speech she had heard him make. And the most honest. She nodded once. "Then let's make it worth something," she said. What followed over the next 2 years was a story that Marston City would tell for decades. Cole and Clara Reardon negotiated mineral rights with 2 separate railroad-backed mining companies, not selling the land outright, never that, but leasing extraction rights at terms Clara structured herself, terms that guaranteed the Reardon Ranch a percentage of every ton extracted. She wrote every contract by hand. She had a lawyer in Austin review them. She rejected the first 2 offers as inadequate. The third offer, from the Southern Pacific's affiliate, was the one she accepted. With the initial payment, they expanded the cattle operation to 800 head. Clara redesigned the breeding program based on research she had written away to a university in Virginia to obtain. The quality of Reardon cattle, and therefore the price they commanded at market, improved measurably within 18 months. She also hired a schoolteacher for the children of the ranch hands, established a small medical fund for the families living and working the property, and planted what would eventually become the largest kitchen garden in the county. Santiago, who had watched all of this unfold with the quiet satisfaction of a man who had been right about something important, told the story to anyone who would listen. He said that the moment he knew everything would be fine was not the confrontation with Harlan, not the survey, not the contracts. It was the morning after the fire, when he had looked across the burned field and seen Cole and Clara standing side by side in the smoke and ash. Not defeated, not panicked, just figuring out the next move. 2 people thinking the same direction, he always said. That's when I knew. As for Douglas Harlan, the fraudulent boundary filing was dismissed by the state. The arson investigation, slow as it was, eventually traced the kerosene purchase to one of his hired men. Garrett, the plant he had placed in Cole's ranch, confessed in exchange for reduced charges. Harlan's company lost its charter within 3 years, and Harlan himself left Marston City quietly one morning without announcement, in the way men leave places when the ground has entirely shifted under them. Nobody saw him go. Nobody looked too hard. By 1879, the Reardon Ranch had grown to 6,000 acres. The cattle operation was the largest in West Texas by volume. The mineral lease payments had made Cole and Clara independently wealthy by any standard of the era. But the thing people remembered, the thing that made the ranch more than just a business success, was what it looked like when you rode up to it. The house had been expanded but not pretentiously. The porch still ran the length of the front. Children of the ranch hands still played in the yard at evening. Santiago still sat at the fire most nights telling stories to whoever would sit with him. And if you were lucky, you might see them together at the fence line at dusk. Cole, big and quiet, and Clara, straight-backed with her journal in her hand, standing side by side watching the last light fall across 6,000 acres of Texas that nobody had been able to take from them. They said she was useless. They said she was a burden, a disruption, a mistake sent in a dress to undo one quiet man's life's work. They were so wrong that history has almost forgotten they tried. What Douglas Harlan never understood, what men like him rarely do, is that when you try to use a person as a weapon, you should first make sure you understand what that person is made of. Because sometimes the weapon turns in your hand. And sometimes what you thought was broken is the strongest thing in the room. Clara Weston arrived in West Texas with nothing. No money, no allies, no family, just a leather journal, a mind that never stopped working, and a life's worth of being underestimated. Cole Reardon had land and stubborn decency and the kind of tired loneliness that makes a man vulnerable to exactly the kind of scheme Harlan built. But he also had the wisdom to recognize something real when it stood in his yard without flinching. Together, they built what separately they might never have reached. That, in the end, is what the Reardon Ranch really was. Not iron ore, not 6,000 acres, not beef contracts or mineral leases or the biggest cattle herd in West Texas. It was proof. Proof that the ground beneath your feet is only as valuable as the people willing to stand on it and fight. Proof that the people others write off, the ones sent as pawns, moved like pieces, dismissed as liabilities, sometimes see the board more clearly than anyone. And proof that out here, in the red dust and the wide open silence of the West, the most powerful thing a person could be was simply someone who refused, completely and without apology, to be what someone else needed them to be. The wagon that carried Clara Weston to Texas carried what looked like defeat. What it actually carried was the future. And nobody who saw it coming ever saw it coming at all. What would you have done in Cole's place? Would you have trusted her that quickly? Let me know in the comments. And if this story stayed with you, you already know what to do.